Kublai Khan was born during the height of Mongol power in the year 1215, a time when the great Genghis Khan still ruled the largest land empire the world had ever witnessed. As a child, Kublai was raised with both privilege and expectation, for he belonged to the imperial bloodline that had reshaped Asia. From an early age he was taught to ride horses with speed and confidence, to hunt with accuracy, and to prepare for the harsh life that all Mongol leaders were expected to endure. His education was not limited to the battlefield, though, for he also learned philosophy, reading, and writing. This upbringing gave him a unique blend of intellectual strength and military capability. His mother, Sorkatani Beki, was a wise Karait princess who encouraged her sons to understand both their own Mongol traditions and the cultures of the great civilizations around them, especially China. His father, Talyui, had been one of the strongest sons of Genghis Khan, and through this lineage Kublai inherited ambition and responsibility. By the time Kublai reached his mid-30s, his brother Monk had risen to become the great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Monk trusted Kublai deeply and relied on him as both a general and an administrator. At this time, the Mongols were pressing into the rich and vast territories of China, fighting both the northern and southern dynasties that still resisted Mongol authority. Kublai gained fame for his victories against Chinese states and for his ability to govern the lands he conquered, but tragedy struck when Monk died unexpectedly during the war against the Song dynasty in the south. With Monk gone, the throne of the great Khan was once again open, and Kublai believed that he was the rightful heir. The empire, however, was far too large and far too divided for such a transition to be smooth. Another brother, Arigboj, was proclaimed as the next great Khan by supporters within Mongolia. This shocked and enraged Kublai, for he saw it as a political betrayal. At the time he had been deep inside China and could not immediately return, so he arranged a quick truce with the Song dynasty to free himself from the southern war. With this temporary peace in place, he hurried back to Mongolia and held his own great assembly known as a Kuriltai, where he was proclaimed Great Khan in the year 1260. This meant that for the first time in Mongol history, two rivals claimed the same throne. A bitter civil war followed that lasted 4 years. Armies loyal to Kublai clashed with those loyal to Arigboj, and the fighting dragged across the steppes until Arigboj finally surrendered in 1264. Kublai Khan had secured the throne, but not without damage, for the unity of the Mongol Empire had been permanently weakened. With his internal rival defeated, Kublai turned his attention back toward China. He admired many Chinese traditions and customs, though he still believed that the Mongols were superior as rulers. During the 1270s, his armies slowly crushed the remaining resistance of the Song dynasty until all of China came under his authority. China was ancient, rich, and vast. To govern it effectively, Kublai understood that he needed not only military control, but also a cultural transformation. In 1271, he declared that the Mongol-ruled empire in China would now be called the Yuan Dynasty, and he moved his capital to the city that would eventually become modern Beijing. Although he tried to adopt Chinese administrative methods and present himself as a rightful ruler, he created a strict social hierarchy. Mongols were placed at the top, followed by non-Chinese foreigners who served in administrative roles, while the large population of Chinese peasants were placed at the bottom. This created resentment and social tension that would linger throughout his reign. Kublai Khan was known as a tolerant ruler in matters of religion. He allowed Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, and other groups to practice their faiths freely. Still, he personally favored Tibetan Buddhism and gave its leaders special privileges. Even though he was not excessively brutal, he could still be firm when he felt his authority was threatened. His rule over China saw advancements in trade, public works, and scholarship, but it also saw rising poverty and heavy taxation on the Chinese people. To many Chinese, he was more lenient than other conquerors, yet he was still a foreign ruler who placed his own people above all others. Despite his efforts to stabilize China, Kublai never lost his desire for expansion. Near the end of the 13th century, he sought new regions to bring under his influence, and one of his targets was the island of Java, which lay far to the south. In 1292, he sent an envoy named Meng Qi to convince the king of Singasari to submit to Mongol protection in exchange for tribute. The king Kertanagara reacted with fury. He mutilated the envoy by slicing off his ears and branding his face before sending him back to the Mongols. Such an insult demanded retaliation. The Great Khan ordered a massive expedition said to include 30,000 soldiers and 1,000 ships with the goal of punishing the Javanese kingdom. However, before the Mongol fleet reached Java, the situation had dramatically changed. King Kertanagara had been killed by a rebellious vassal named Jayakatwang, who seized the throne. When the Mongols arrived, they saw that the man who had insulted them was already dead, which created confusion about whether the expedition should continue. The Javanese prince Raden Wijaya, who was the son-in-law of the slain king, saw an opportunity. He approached the Mongols and proposed an alliance to overthrow Jaya Katwang. The Mongols agreed, and together they marched against the new king. The combined forces defeated Jaya Katwang and destroyed his army, which seemed to make the Mongol mission a success. Raden Wijaya then told the Mongol commanders that he needed to return to his home region of Majapahit to gather tribute for the Great Khan. One of the Mongol leaders, Gaoxing, warned that Wijaya might betray them, but the other commanders did not listen. They allowed Wijaya to return home and even agreed to send some Mongol troops unarmed to assist him.
This décision proved disastrous.
As the Mongol soldiers approached Majapahit, Wijaya launched a surprise attack and slaughtered the unarmed men. He then attacked the remaining Mongol forces, who were caught completely off guard. Chaos spread throughout the Mongol ranks as they struggled to mount any defense. Realizing their defeat, they rushed back to their ships and fled the island, while monsoon winds still allowed them to sail. Thousands of Mongol soldiers had been killed, and the grand expedition ended in humiliation. When Gaoxing returned, he was rewarded by Kublai Khan for his wisdom, while the other commanders were punished for ignoring his warnings. Even so, the Great Khan was in no condition to launch a new campaign. By this time he was old, grieving, and increasingly unhealthy. The deaths of family members, combined with the weight of ruling such an enormous empire, had taken a heavy toll on his spirit. He turned to food and drink for comfort, and soon his body could no longer keep up with his desires. He gained significant weight and suffered from declining health that no physician could reverse. On the 18th of February in the year 1294, the great ruler who had once commanded the mightiest empire on earth took his final breath at the age of 79. His death marked the beginning of the decline of the Yuan Dynasty, which would fall less than a century later as Chinese rebellions grew stronger. Kublai Khan had achieved extraordinary things. He had conquered China, unified vast territories, encouraged cultural exchange, and connected distant regions through trade. Yet he also presided over a period of internal division, rising inequality, and failed foreign adventures. His expedition to Java was one of the greatest disasters of his career. The man they hoped to punish had already died. The man they helped out of convenience betrayed them. The fleet returned home in disgrace, and the once unstoppable Mongol war machine looked vulnerable for the first time. Though Kublai Khan died far from a defeated man, he passed away with the knowledge that his empire was no longer as mighty as it had been under Genghis Khan. The Mongol world was beginning to fracture, and regional rulers were asserting their independence. The center could not hold, and the unity of the Mongol Empire faded. Meanwhile, in Java, Raden Wijaya established the Majapahit Empire, which soon grew into one of the most powerful kingdoms in Southeast Asian history. Ironically, it was built in part through the defeat of the very invaders who had once dominated most of the continent. The rise of Majapahit stood as a symbol of the limits of even the greatest conqueror's power and the fall of Kublai's ambitions in the region. Kublai Khan remains one of the most fascinating figures in world history. He was a conqueror, a lawgiver, a patron of culture, and a man shaped by both ambition and tragedy. His reign brought glory to the Mongol Empire, yet also revealed the vulnerabilities that would one day lead to its decline. His story is one of power, conflict, betrayal, transformation, and the eternal struggle of maintaining an empire that had stretched beyond what any ruler could truly control.